Today I'm going to talk about and show you the main Obi designs that they used on Elvis's albums in Japan in the 1960s. There were basically four of them, but a few albums that appeared with different kinds of Obis, different colours or different designs or whatever. But most of the albums in the 60s came with an Obi that was similar to one of the four types that I'm going to show you today. At the end of the video, I'll give you my 5 top Obis to look out for from the 1960s. Now the first one I'll show you is one of my favourites, the red one. This is a stereo copy of Elvis from 1962, and the mono copy also had the same red Obi design. There are slight differences in the text and design between stereo and mono, but basically the same. I was under the impression that only this album was released with a red Obi, but in fact there are other ones too. Now, in a video I did a few months ago, I talked about a couple of series of Elvis album reissues in Japan, one of which was called Presley Album series, and the other was called the Presley Stereo Album series. Now the first 3 in the mono series were Elvis and King Creole and Golden Records Volume 3. Now it turns out that all 3 of those albums came with red Obis, just like this one. And I'll put a picture of those 2 albums up on the screen for you so you can see what they look like. Now this is the stereo album, as you can see. Now this was the first album also in the stereo series as well as in the mono series. Now the second album in the stereo series was the first album, Elvis Presley, and the third album was again Golden Records, same as in the mono series. Now I found a picture of the Elvis Presley album with a red Obi, so I'll put that on the screen for you. Now I haven't been able to locate a copy of the Golden Records stereo album with a red Obi, but I sort of have a dim and distant memory of having seen one a long time ago. But anyway, it's my guess that the first 3 albums in the stereo series, like the first 3 albums in the mono series, were all released with these red Obis. Now the other albums in those 2 series from 1962, Presley Album Series and Presley Stereo Album Series, all came with blue Obis like this one. There were about another 5 or 6 albums in each series. Now you can see that there are some similarities between the 2 Obis. They're both stereo pressings. You can see that Nipper is inside this semicircle, white semicircle at the top. However, if you look at the top of the King Creole Obi here, there's a Japanese word at the top in this white strip, and that says stereo. This album here doesn't have it. Now the copy of Elvis Presley with the red Obi, which I showed earlier, the picture I showed earlier, that does have the white strip at the top saying stereo. So this album came out in April of 1962, and the Elvis Presley album came out in May 1962. So I think that album was the first one to have this stereo strip here at the top in Japanese. And they continued to use that on stereo albums until Golden Records Volume 3 in 1963. And when Golden Records came out in 1963, there were other changes to the Obi as well. The colour changed to a dark blue colour, like the one you can see here on this copy of Roustabout. And also Nipper was no longer inside the semicircle, but he was put inside this rectangular white strip, and it's just the same on Golden Records Volume 3. And I haven't shown this one before, so I'll just take you through this one. This is like a lot of the soundtrack albums in the 60s. This one is in a gatefold sleeve, and this is the back cover here. The back cover is quite unusual because all the song titles are in English. Usually they're in Japanese, or Japanese and English. And there's the inside of the gatefold. They're fairly flimsy, and they're just laminated on the front and back, but not on the inside. So the problem with this kind of design is sometimes the edges can get a bit rough because the laminate goes right to the edges, but it doesn't go over to the other side. But this is actually quite a nice nice copy. And looking at these two together, there is another little difference you can see if you look closely. The King Creole Obi here on the left, the light blue one, it has a Super Record logo at the bottom. That's some kind of a compound that they put in the records to stop it attracting dust. And on the Roustabout Obi, it no longer has the Super Record logo, although it still has it on the labels, but not on the Obi. So Fun in Acapulco was the last Obi to have this Super Record logo. So the dark blue Obis, like the Roustabout one there, they were used right up until the end of the Victor era. The last album released on Victor was Speedway in 1968, and that also has a dark blue Obi like that one. And from 1969, Elvis's records in Japan were released on RCA. So with the new label came a new Obi design, and that was this red and white one here that you can see on this copy of From Elvis in Memphis. Now, there are only a few new albums released with this Obi design. Flaming Star, this one, and a compilation album called Golden Hymn. That was about it, really. And there were also several reissues which had this red and white label too, and here's an example here for LP fans only. This dates from 1970. A lot of the soundtracks you can sometimes find as well, like California Holiday, Speedway, Double Trouble. The reissues on RCA, they will have this red and white design. Another change that happened with the covers, well, with the covers, not the Obis. The covers by that point are no longer laminated. They're on thick. They're in thick card covers, but they're not laminated anymore. Now, this album nicely leads me on to the next part of the video, where I'd like to talk about 5 Obis that you should look out for if you're interested in getting some very, very rare Obis. So this album, as I say, this is the first one with the red and white Obi. Now, this was available for a very short time in a red, white and blue Obi, which looks like this one here. Exactly the same design, it's red, white and blue Obi design. But From Elvis in Memphis was not available for very long with this red, white and blue Obi. So that would be the first one to look out for. Another one to look out for is the mono copy of Fun in Acapulco. So Fun in Acapulco was the last mono album released in Japan, and in fact the album itself is difficult to find. So if you can find one with the Obi, you should expect to pay a lot of money. Another one to look out for is the very first pressing of GI Blues from 1961, and this is what the cover looks like, living stereo. It was re-released in 1962, but the one I'm talking about is this one here. If you can find a copy of this, in itself is quite hard to find, but if you can find one with the Obi, then you've got something very rare and valuable. Another one to look out for is His Hand in Mine, the original pressings from 1961, either the mono or the stereo version. Very, very hard to find with an Obi. And last but not least, another title from 1961, Something for Everybody. Another very rare album with the Obi. So again, mono or stereo, if you can find either one of those, you've got something very collectible, very worthwhile having. Very hard to find. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for today. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't be shy about leaving a comment. I'll get back to you. So thanks a lot for watching, and take care.